Today's story is about a man who lost everything in life. While lying on the side of the road, a cat suddenly enters his life. From that day on, a man's life starts to change little by little. Eventually, this cat makes the man the biggest celebrity in town. This is the story of the 2014 movie A Street Cat Named Bob, which is based on a true story. Let's see what happened with this man and the cat. The story revolves around a man named James, who has been thrown out of the house by his father due to his drug addiction. James has been living as a nomad on the streets for the past 9 years. He had no place to stay and no clothes to wear. He even had to spend days without food due to a lack of money. He had a guitar, which he used to earn some money by playing and singing. With that money, he managed to feed himself, spending the night wherever he could find a little space on the streets of London. But he was responsible for his plight. He would not have faced such a time if he had not fallen into the drugs trap. Finally, he realizes his mistake and promises himself that he will escape the deadly trap of addiction. If James had to sacrifice all his worldly happiness and comfort for this, he is willing to do so. One night, James was looking for a place to sleep on the streets of London when it suddenly started to rain heavily. In the middle of the rain, a man named Baz approached him and asked about another person. Without answering Baz, James went out in search of food because he was extremely hungry. Baz was the one who had introduced James to drugs, so James now tried to avoid him as much as possible. James went to a restaurant and ordered some food. The waiter packed the food for him, but when it came time to pay, James realized he was short on money. He pleaded with the waiter to give him the food and promised to pay the remaining amount the next day. However, the waiter refused and threw the food into the trash bin. Seeing this, James became very angry. The waiter could have just given him the food instead of wasting it. As he came out in anger, he met Baz again. Baz was sitting inside another man's car. Seeing James, Baz said, "I found the car unlocked, so I will spend the night here. You can join me, it's raining heavily outside." James had no place to stay, so he reluctantly agreed to stay with Baz. However, that night, Baz again pressured James to take drugs. James tried hard to resist, but eventually gave in to Baz's insistence and started taking drugs. The next morning, when the owner of the car arrived, Baz ran away. But James was so intoxicated that he had no idea what was happening. Fortunately, the car owner was a kind person and took James to the hospital. There, James met a doctor named Angelina, who ran a rehab center where James was already a patient. Angelina scolded him severely after seeing his condition. James, repentant, said, "I don't want to get drugs myself, but last night I was forced because of Baz's insistence." Angelina responded, "If you continue to intoxicate yourself like this, the medicines you're taking will not have any effect on your body. Not only that, but if you continue this addiction, the drugs you're taking will cause your death." James was very upset about his addiction, so he promised Angelina that he would never touch drugs again and would take his medications according to the rules. Angelina then restarted James' therapy. James once again began to sing in the streets. Angelina felt bad that James didn't have a place to stay, so she set out to find him one. She talked to her boss about this, but her boss told her that there were no available houses. Seeing Angelina's interest in James, her boss asked her why she was so invested in him. Angelina replied, "I always think that James can be a big and successful man one day. So I want him to come out of addiction as soon as possible." Meanwhile, James was trying hard to stay away from drugs. He kept his distance from Baz to avoid being influenced again. Finally, one day, Angelina arranged a room for James. Seeing Angelina help him like this, James became very emotional and thanked her from the bottom of his heart. Angelina then made him promise that he would never do drugs again. James promised because he wanted to get rid of his addiction. James was overjoyed to have such a beautiful place to stay. He went straight to the washroom to take a bath. Before he finished showering, he suddenly heard a noise from the kitchen. He ran to find that a cat had entered the kitchen and started eating his food. James knew all too well what hunger felt like, so he petted the cat and fed it more. After eating, he put the cat near the window so it could return to its family. But the cat, possibly in a similar situation to James, didn't go anywhere. James then thought that since both he and the cat were alone, he would keep the cat for companionship. That night, James sang a song to the cat, and they fell asleep together. The next morning, James took the cat to a park, thinking he couldn't take care of it properly in his current condition. He wondered how he could feed the cat when he had no stable source of food. Despite his reluctance, he left the cat in the park, hoping it would find a better life. However, James continued singing on the streets. Suddenly, he saw his father, Jack. James ran over and tried to talk to him, telling him that he had stopped taking drugs. But Jack couldn't believe his words. James insisted, "You have to believe me, Dad. I've started going to a rehab center." While talking to his father, James's stepmother, Clara, suddenly appeared. James begged Clara, please let me come home for Christmas. I want to celebrate Christmas with all of you. Clara then said a lot of harsh things to James and left. Jack and Clara walked away together, but before leaving, Jack handed James some money. Although the amount was very small, it was enough for James to get by for a while. James headed home with the money, but his mind was filled with one thought: why can't my father trust me? I'm trying to get better. He should support me, but it seems like he can't stand me. Lost in these thoughts, James reached home and saw the cat sitting by the door. The cat appeared to be injured, which made James sad. He didn't know what to do. At that moment, he met his neighbor, Katie, who had a good knowledge of animals. He immediately took the cat to her. Katie gave James the address of a pet hospital and told him to see the doctor there. The problem was that there was a long line every day. Nonetheless, James went to the hospital. That day, there was indeed a very long line. James became tense because he had a session with Angelina that day. He kept checking the time, anxious about when his turn would come. By the time it did, his session time had passed. Despite this, James prioritized getting the cat checked first. The doctor examined the cat and prescribed some medicine. When he bought the medicine, James had to use the money his father had given him. Although he could have used it for food and drinks for a few days, he chose to prioritize the cat's health over his own needs. After returning home, James tried to medicate the cat, but after many attempts, he failed. He then went to Katie again for help. Katie gave the cat the medicine in no time. James was very surprised to see this. Katie said, "You have to treat the cat well first, be comfortable with him, and then he will never leave you." She even decided on a name for James's cat, Perry. Later, James learned that Katie did not like drug addicts or non-vegetarians, so he introduced himself as a singer. He booked a session with Angelina for the next day. During the session, Angelina scolded James a lot for missing the previous day's session. James then told her everything about Katie and Perry. Angelina tried to convince him that he was still not completely over his addiction and that getting involved in any kind of relationship now would not be right for him, whether with a human or an animal. She explained that if they left his life or suffered any harm, he might not be able to handle it and could be forced back into addiction. But James couldn't accept Angelina's words because he had complete confidence in himself that he would never take drugs again now that he had found a friend in Perry. One day, James was standing at the bus stop with Perry, waiting for the bus. As soon as the bus arrived, he said goodbye to Perry and got on. Seeing him get on the bus, Perry ran after him and got on the bus too. James was very angry to see him on the bus like this, but everyone on the bus started to love Perry. James was happy to see this and then sat down with Perry by his side. The bus conductor came and tied a ribbon around Perry's neck so that he wouldn't get lost. After reaching their destination, they got off the bus. Perry started running around, becoming too difficult for James to handle. But eventually, he managed to catch Perry. He then took Perry on his shoulders and went to his usual spot, where he played the guitar every day. Everyone was very surprised to see Perry. In a very short time, there was a lot of excitement around James, something he had never been able to generate before. People were more inclined towards dogs back then, so when they saw James petting a cat, they found it quite interesting. Because of Perry, James earned a good amount of money that day, making him very happy. From a distance, Badge saw James with so much money and was surprised. After going home that day, James ate his favorite foods, and Perry also enjoyed a lot of interesting treats. The next morning, Badge met James when he left the house and asked him for money. James replied, "I have no money. I know you buy drugs with that money and get high, so I can't give you any money." Badge insisted, "You've got it wrong. I won't use this money for drugs. I'm very hungry, and I will buy food with it." Hearing this, James's perception shifted, and he gave Badge some money. James's fortunes improved from then on, and he started earning good money every day. Perry became a lucky charm in James's life. One day, an old woman happily tied a scarf around Perry's neck, saying it would protect Perry from all kinds of evil eyes. That day, Katie visited James and invited them to her house for dinner, mentioning that Katie would cook all the food herself. James went to Katie's house, and they talked a lot, spending a very nice time together. Perry sat in a corner and listened to their conversation. On the way home, James bought some necessities from a supermarket. On his way back, he suddenly saw Badge on the road. James ran to help, and Katie saw from a distance and joined him. Together, they grabbed Badge and took him to Katie's house. After going home, Katie burst into tears and told James, "I can't stand drug addicts at all. My younger brother lost his life due to addiction. I found his body in the bathroom of this house." Hearing this, James became very emotional and started comforting Katie. The next day, James went to Angelina and said, "I am far from being addicted. I have given up thinking about addiction, so I don't want to continue the drugs anymore." Angelina tried to convince him, "You are not fully recovered yet. It is foolish to stop the medication now." James didn't want to listen, so Angelina said, "Look, I'm saying this for your good. You need to continue your treatment for a few more days, then you can stop the medication. Please take this as my request, not just advice." James agreed, and he went home. A few days later, Christmas arrived, and James celebrated a beautiful day with Katie and Perry. Katie gave him a painting as a gift. However, after leaving, James started missing his father very much. He had thought he would spend this Christmas with his family, but sadly, his father had not looked out for him at all. Unable to stop himself, James went straight home. When he got there, his stepsister started calling him a drug addict, and then his stepmother insulted him. James wasn't expecting that at all, and he became very upset. Suddenly, Perry got very angry and started causing a commotion in the whole house. Seeing James being scolded like that made Perry angry, and he avenged his master's insult by breaking the furniture in the house. Finally, James caught Perry and took her out. James' stepmother poisoned his mind by talking nonsense to James' father against James, and so now Jack doesn't even like his son. However, the next morning, when James was performing at his usual spot, a dog suddenly came and defecated on James' money bag. James and the dog's owner quarreled about it, and at some point, the argument escalated into a fight. Just then, the police arrived and took James away. Fortunately, Angelina managed to get him released from the police station, but Perry was taken into custody by the police. Angelina then told James, "I have some bad news for you. You won't be able to perform on the street for the next 6 months. That means you need to find a new job." James asked Angelina about Perry, and she replied, "I will bring Perry to you, but you need to take your medicine first." James agreed and went to the pharmacy. While he was there, Katie saw him taking his medicine. Realizing that James had been lying to her and that he was still a drug addict, she angrily stormed out. James noticed this and ran after Katie, trying to convince her, but she refused to believe anything he said. Feeling distressed and helpless, James didn't know what to do next. Unable to perform on the street, he was forced to start looking for a job. After much searching, he finally got a job selling books for a company. Perry helped him a lot with this work. Seeing Perry, people started coming to James and buying his books. Some even paid extra just to see Perry. This attention from customers was not tolerated by James' colleagues, who complained to the boss, saying that pets should not be present during work hours. The boss summoned James and warned him never to bring Perry to work again. Unable to accept this because of his deep love for Perry, James decided to leave the job. But then he ran into another problem. The money he had deposited slowly began to run out. He found himself in the same situation again, with no money to buy food. Desperate, he decided to start performing on the street again, despite knowing that if he got caught, he would have to spend a few months in jail. With no other options, he forced himself to perform. The next day, Katie saw James performing on the side of the road and immediately tried to convince him to stop. At that moment, James realized that Katie had started to like him. Moved by her concern, he decided to leave street performing and go back to work at the book company. His days were going well, but one day, a dog barked at his pet, Perry. Frightened, Perry ran away. James searched everywhere for her but couldn't find her. Days passed, and despite his efforts, Perry remained missing. Gradually, everyone started to distance themselves from him, leaving James feeling lonely and broken. In such situations, people often turn to what they are passionate about. James, struggling with his emotions, decided to go out and buy cocaine. However, he regained control of himself and returned home. To his immense relief, he found Perry in the kitchen and was overjoyed. James then met with Angelina, telling her that he no longer wanted to take drugs and had learned to control himself. Angelina agreed to help but warned him that the next week would be very tough. Despite the difficulty, James was determined to overcome his addiction. He decided to spend the entire week at home to avoid making any foolish decisions. Those 7 days were indeed challenging for him, but he remained committed to his goal. But still, he did not give up, and Perry helped him a lot with this task. With great difficulty, he was able to pass those 7 days. Then he met Katie. Katie was getting a shift in a new apartment that day, and James was upset when he found out. However, Katie gave him the address of her new home. After going to the office that day, a book publisher came to see James. The lady said to James, "I want to publish your life story." She then gave James a laptop and said, "You will write your own story, and we will publish it." James left with the laptop and went straight to meet his father. He told his father, "I'm completely off drugs, and I'm also writing a book." His father became very emotional and pulled out a childhood photo of James from his wallet to show him. James realized that his father still loved him just as much as before, but due to circumstances, he couldn't express his love. James then went back to his house and began to write his story. After 5 months, he finished writing the story. It was published and titled A Street Cat Named Bob, and people liked the book a lot. It sold in large quantities. James became an overnight celebrity. Not only did his book become a bestseller, but fans lined up to meet him. Among them were Jack and Katie. James is extremely happy and uses the money earned from his book to buy a house for himself. The story ends here for now, but the main story doesn't end here. There is another part to the story. I will be bringing you the second part very soon. You might be wondering why the cat was named Bob in the book even though its name was Perry. The reason is that, in real life, the person who experienced these events had a cat named Bob. Due to privacy policies, some names were changed in the movie. I hope you enjoyed today's story. So if you like the story, please like and comment, and if you are new to our channel, then subscribe to the channel and click the bell button.